Dr. Kristin Du Mez, Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation.
This is a great interview, Jason. She wrote this book, Jesus and John Wayne, which I have not been able to put down. I think every Christian, evangelical Christian, should read this book.
Yeah.
Because it's full of the kind of nuance and history that makes you realize how we can lose our moorings of the gospel that Jesus represented and create a gospel that has nothing to do with him.
Yeah, she's a professor of history, gender studies at Calvin University. Her whole approach is historic in nature. She is looking at how we got to where we are now, how evangelicalism has become anti-biblical.
She's coming at this from a standpoint of transferring really allegiance to the kingdom to allegiance to a party.
Yeah, that's it.
An allegiance to a means of reaching a morality goal or a, quote, righteous endeavor through a system that God never intended it to be reached through.
Yeah.
It's very Machiavellian how our politics work. The end justifies the means. Jesus doesn't act that way.
Yeah.
And she has written a history, and I would say it's a really kind history. She doesn't pull any punches. She names names. She talks about people and structures and organizations that have misused their power and appropriated their power in horrific ways that have hurt people and have created institutions that their only goal is to hold on to power.
Yeah.
But I think she's also exposing something inside of our hearts. And as I read this, man, my heart just came alive in terms of, well, we can break free from this. What was the statement
at the end of the book
she made at the end of the book?
What was once done might also be undone.
Yeah.
I love that she went after the nature of power. I mean, she takes a historical approach, and she's particularly looking at the history of evangelicalism in America. But we were able to talk about the impact that's had in us in our daily lives and how we do church.
I came away informed, but also inspired that by living our individual lives differently and our community lives differently, we can make a difference.
This could be stretching, but that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
I think so. I mean,
what if we did a podcast that was relational in nature?
It
might sound something like that.
I'd be a part of that.
I'd do that too. This is a good one, guys. I really, really enjoyed this, and I think it'll be encouraging and empowering to all of you guys.
This is Dr. Kristin Du Mez.
Yeah.
She wrote the book Jesus and John Wayne, and we are very, very excited to have you today. I got to tell you, this book is right up my alley. I have a degree in journalism, and I love the history. I love the sourcing. I love the quotes. You have outdone yourself with this book, and it is really, really impressive.
Thank you.
And my wife loves it. She is a huge fan as well. It's caused so much conversation in our home. I have a 23-year-old daughter, and we're just all over the map in my home. And we have had amazing conversations, which is another thing I love about this book is the level of nuance that you convey is just so powerful. I mean, normally you have like just a black and white kind of picture, but I'm telling you, you hit the nuance in this book that I think everyone is going to feel comfortable. No one's going to feel comfortable reading this book, period. But they're going to feel like they're not maybe being threatened on both sides. Everyone, I think, is welcome into the nuance of this book. And that is an impressive feat, which I just want to compliment you for and say thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that's the way you heard it. That's a huge compliment. So I'm really grateful that's the way the book came across.
We're really excited to have you here. Honored that you would come on. We both have kids that are in their late teens and radical thinkers, some over here, some over there. So big conversations. And your book has been incredible in our house. Your work has brought enlightenment to these conversations. So we're really glad you're here.
Thank you.
Why don't we start with a little personal background, if you don't mind. Tell us a little bit of your story, family, upbringing, those sort of things.
Sure. I grew up in a small town in Iowa, Sioux Center, Iowa, and I grew up in a pretty conservative Christian enclave. primarily Dutch immigrant community. So my mom actually immigrated from the Netherlands when she was young and lived in this little Reformed subculture. So my dad is an ordained minister in the Christian Reformed Church. He was a theology professor at Dordt University. That's where I went to college. So I really grew up in that very distinctive confessional religious space. I didn't grow up identifying as a white evangelical or as an evangelical. I grew up identifying as very specifically as a Dutch Reformed Christian over against American evangelicalism, over against American Christianity. And, we were different. We were smarter than evangelicals. So that was my self-identity.
Right.
It wasn't really until I got to graduate school that I went to graduate school to study religious and intellectual history, worked with George Marsden, the kind of guru of the history of American evangelicalism. And there I met real evangelicals. Like these guys were coming, my classmates were coming from Wheaton College, from Moody Bible Institute, from Bob Jones University, right? And so then I realized that they had a very different kind of background. They knew different people. Their stories were different. But the places where we intersected, really, where our experiences overlapped, were popular culture. So even though I grew up in this distinctive subculture, there was one bookstore in my town, and it was a Christian bookstore. Right? I grew up only listening to CCM, to contemporary Christian music.
Sure.
Only.
Just the Christian stuff.
Only. I mean, top 40 was sinful.
Right.
I was supposed to only listen to the Christian music, but I was very sneaky. And
no.
See, that was my brother. I was not. I was a rule follower. So, I mean, I did break that rule once, and I bought a Tiffany cassette. That was like my one, like super rebellious act. Otherwise, it was all Michael Card and Jars of Clay. So anyway,
I think you're alone now.
Totally. Oh, it brings back memories and guilt. So much guilt. So anyway, that I think you can kind of see that in this book too, where I'm asking questions about what does it mean to be an evangelical, and whereas a lot of historians had really privileged the theological definition. So if you proclaim certain beliefs, and if you check off theological boxes, then you're an evangelical. For me, I see evangelicalism as a cultural movement, as an identity. So did you grow up listening to Focus on the Family Radio? Did you grow up reading Josh Harris, right? That's what it really means to be an evangelical. And so that's the history that I write.
Yeah. And how about family?
Yes.
Let's talk just a little more personal if we can. We want to hear about your family.
Okay. So my family that I grew up in, I'm one of 4 children. So second of 4. I have an older brother, a younger brother, and then a younger sister. They're kind of all over the map, do all kinds of different things. One of my brothers is a federal judge. One of my brothers is a vice president of really big corporations. I don't quite understand what they do, like global stuff. And then my sister is an accountant, and right now a stay-at-home mom of 2. So that's my birth family. And my mom was a PE teacher. I always said my dad was a pastor or a theology professor, and then he preached on the side. My mom was a PE teacher, my PE teacher at the local Christian school. She passed away a couple years ago while I was writing this book, actually. And then my family then in terms of my husband is working remotely just downstairs and he works in IT. And then I have 3 kids. I have a 14-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl. And on Saturday, I will have an 8-year-old girl.
Wow.
So those are my kids, and keeps things busy. But that's, we've been spending a lot of quality time together with the pandemic. And as of today, my kids were all in quarantine. They all had COVID the last 3-4 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So this is the first day they are all back at school, which is very exciting.
I was watching one of your podcasts, and you talked about this newer book, Jesus and John Wayne, almost as an obsession, as something you had to write.
Yes.
I'm a writer. I understand that very much, that if I'm writing something, it's a lot of work, a whole lot of work that goes into it. And so it has to be something that you're passionate about, that you very much think will impact and change people's lives. I would love to know why it was an obsession, what was burning in you. And then also I would love to have you step that into the definition today of evangelicalism, and how you were defining it. And I imagine those are all tied together.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the writing of this book was really intense. I first started this research more than 15 years ago, actually. So I was introduced to this vast literature on Christian manhood back in around 2005, 2006 by my students. I teach at Calvin University, right? Christian students, evangelical students come my way in my classes, and they were the ones who first tipped me off to John Eldredge's Wild at Heart. And I was really interested in that book, and both how Eldredge defined Christian masculinity as, essentially militaristic. God is a warrior God, and men are made in his image. Every man has a battle to fight, and how he wasn't really drawing on the scriptures much at all to present this vision of Christian masculinity. It was really influenced by popular culture, by Hollywood movies, and so on. And I was intrigued at the time how this was in 2005 or 6 when I came across this initially. And at that time, it was the early years of the Iraq War. And we had all this survey data coming in showing how white evangelicals were far more likely than other Americans to support that war, to support preemptive war in general, condone the use of torture, and so on. And so I really was curious what a militant conception of masculinity might have to do with this very aggressive foreign policy.
Right.
So that was a long time ago. And I spent a year and a half researching this topic.
Okay.
And then I set it aside. I did for a couple of reasons. One, it was incredibly disturbing stuff I was uncovering, like deeply misogynistic. This is the Mark Driscoll era. I found it revolting. I wasn't sure I wanted to live with this material for the time it would take to write the book. And I also wasn't sure if this was mainstream because it felt so fringe. And so I thought, should I really be focusing all my attention on this if it's really a fringe movement? And is that good for American Christianity, frankly, right? I'm a Christian myself.
Right.
So I just set it aside and thought, I'll circle back maybe someday. And that day came in the fall of 2016. It was in the days after the Access Hollywood tapes released.
Okay.
And because I hadn't stopped paying attention, and I saw how one after another of the men who had been promoting this militant masculinity became embroiled in scandal, abuse of power, sexual abuse. And so in the days after Access Hollywood tape, this is when we had then candidate Donald Trump on camera admitting to assaulting women. And we saw his white evangelical supporters, some very small number, temporarily waver and then all come back and support him within the week. And it struck me all of a sudden, we've seen this before. I've seen this before, time and again, evangelicals supporting abusive leaders. And so it kind of clicked for me at that point. And, 4 weeks later, we had the election. We saw this incredible support for Trump from white evangelicals. And a lot of people in the media were saying, how could evangelicals betray their values? And I knew that wasn't true. That wasn't what we were looking at. We had to have a better understanding of what those values actually were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's when I decided I need to write this book. And so I wrote the proposal. First I did several more months of research and then pitched the book, and then you have a deadline, right?
Yes.
And I had a deadline that was a really ambitious deadline because we knew the book had to be out well in advance of the 2020 election.
Okay.
And so I did it. I wrote the first draft in less than a year. I wrote it very quickly because it's easier to write. I wrote it very long, I should say. I wasn't really looking at word count. It's a lot easier to write fast and long than to try to edit as you go.
Yeah.
So then I ended up putting all the pieces together at one point when I was just months away from my deadline. And I saw that word count. I was 60,000 words over my word count.
Yeah.
So that's when I really panicked. I mean, I thought I had been working hard before then, but when I saw that, I thought, I'm in such big trouble, but I signed this contract and what's going to happen? So
I have to cut 60,000 words from this manuscript.
4 months. I cut. I did nothing but cut. That was when it became an obsession.
Yes.
And I thought, I got myself into this. There's only one way out. I have to write myself out of this problem. And so I did. I submitted it to my publisher, my editor. And at that point, I still had 8 months to go to do the edits, which seemed intense, but I could do it.
Sure.
And he got it, read it, and said, okay, I'm going to ask you something. We want to move your deadline up by 4 months. And that's when things got incredibly intense. That summer, I agreed. They knew it needed more time to be out before the election. And that's when I ended up putting in a stretch of 18-hour days. I sent my kids away.
Yeah.
And but honestly, I never had writer's block. I never had a question of what I needed to write. I knew what needed to go into this book. I had 3 amazing research assistants, students at Calvin that helped. And so it felt cathartic to write, honestly. And I wrote this during, the last 4 years, really, intensely during an 18-month stretch. And so while I was seeing all of this kind of play out in terms of evangelicals and the Trump administration and so on, I was sitting on top of all this information, just thinking, I can explain this. This all makes sense within this narrative. And so it didn't really feel like a chore.
Kristen, and once again, thank you for writing this book. It could not be more timely. And I think you did a phenomenal job of cutting those 60,000 words. And now I want to hear those 60,000 words on the backside after.
I just had people asking for him last night. It's like somebody literally volunteered. He's like, give them to me. I'll turn them into blog posts. There's some interesting stuff there.
What comes across crystal clear, though, is that this is something that is a passion of yours in terms of not just exposing for the sake of exposing, but almost explaining. And that's what I mean about the nuance. It's like it's so rich in its historical explanation that, I mean, the Bible tells us clearly that a wise person receives correction. I believe wise people who read this book will have their thinking corrected in terms of the goals that you have in mind for the outcome. And we want to ask you about that in just a second. But one thing, me personally, as far as my response to this book, is it absolutely put words to things that I've known and seen, but just didn't have language for it. You give language to it, and it's such a great, great book, I think, for anybody on any side to read. I mean, as a pastor, and look, I'm a reluctant pastor. I love what I do, but never thought this is what I would be doing. I've taken a political stance from the very beginning to not be affiliated with any party whatsoever. I'm registered, unaffiliated, independent since I've been pastoring for 18 years now. I tell people, okay, I was born in the Johnson administration. And so from Johnson to Biden, all of these people have been my president. None of them have been my savior or my hope.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that we have found that you bring out and bring crystal clear with evangelical culture is that it has strayed from its moorings of maybe a biblical context more into a cultural context. And the feeling I get is that you're looking for your hope in a political solution. So for instance, you're either like super thrilled by who gets voted in, or you're super disappointed by who gets
somehow
voted
it affects
in.
your faith even.
Exactly. And so there's almost that like inordinate hope. It betrays your inordinate hope by either how crazy excited you are or how super despondent you are based on this political thing, when we're supposed to be people who live within this kingdom and within this culture that kind of sits above it and has this law of love at its basis. And so I want to hear a little more about maybe the outcomes of what you're hoping to see achieved by this book. And I'm recommending everybody go buy this book and read it. It really is a phenomenal book.
Oh, thank you. So my purpose for this book, I think, kind of shifted over time, because I think early on, I was disturbed by, some of the patterns I was seeing in conservative evangelicalism, particularly around, again, this kind of embrace of abusive leaders. I was disturbed by the relationship between Christianity and power, how power was perceived and wielded.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me not aligned with my understanding of biblical Christianity. And so I think early on I had the sense that maybe I can change things. Right, I'm going to write a book, and I will show people right, what's right. And then a few months into research, I abandoned that hope because I became convinced that what I was uncovering was just so deeply embedded within this longer history. And I saw how power was structured and wielded. And I thought, oh, this is not going to change. A book is not going to change anything, which was fine. I kind of just settled into that and thought my job as a historian anyway is just to tell the truth.
Right.
It really is just to testify. And that's what I wanted to do in this book. I wanted to tell the truth as accurately and powerfully as possible. But there is a bit of a critical framing here. And I think that the subtitle makes that clear. How white evangelicals corrupted a faith and fractured a nation. Now, the corrupted of faith is not a historical claim. And I want to be really upfront about that, right? In terms of history, like how do you corrupt a faith? A faith is, whatever, how it manifests in that moment in time. So there's a religious claim. I was actually surprised my publisher let me go with that because it's kind of secular publisher, secular audience in mind. But they understood what I was doing in that space. And in the framing of this book, I really am speaking to evangelicals on their own terms, right? Bible believing evangelicals. And one of the things that I think history can do so powerfully is to demonstrate how things that seem to be theological, right? Beliefs, convictions that seem to be God ordained, biblical, are in fact deeply formed by cultural allegiances, right? By historical factors. And so in this book, the Cold War is really important. The Vietnam War, the anti-war movement, civil rights, resistance to civil rights, feminism and resistance to feminism, like all of these things really do come to bear on which beliefs evangelicals cling to, define as orthodox, which they reject. And so I think kind of poignant moments in this book are spaces where I show that these, self-proclaimed Bible-believing Christians are sometimes very comfortable dismissing passages from the scriptures. Turn the other cheek. Jesus says, no, that doesn't apply in this situation. Right. Love your neighbor as yourself, but not, no. The threat is too great. We need to be aggressive. We need to, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. These things are defined as feminine, not appropriate for strong Christian men, right? These are the things. So there is a theological critique that is kind of underlying this book, but the book doesn't depend on it, right? It's mostly just the point is to show this is true for all of us. All of us, as human beings, we are always historically and culturally embedded. This is the way that we are created. And so we should have some humility in terms of how we understand our faith, our convictions, and we should always be critically testing our current convictions, understanding of truth against the scriptures, and bringing in other voices, particularly other believers who may have very different experiences from ours, nationally, racially, ethnically,
gender,
yes. And come together as a community and test ourselves.
Right.
And so that's really, I think, what one of the projects of this book is. It's mostly just a history, but I think it's also a history that I think particularly serves evangelicals who have largely ignored their own history or have kind of written their own versions of history that fail to grapple with, I think, some of the darker sides.
Yeah. I've been paying close attention for this podcast. I've been listening to other podcasts, and I heard you say, and I don't remember which one, but you referenced the publisher coming back to you and asking for some positive
yes
ending to this. Is that right?
Like some hope.
Give us some hope.
Oh, yeah. So, I said that this was really intense. They moved it up the final submission by 4 months, which when you're looking at 8 months, like that's
Yeah.
stressful, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so it was at the very end of that process, and we thought, okay, we're good here, right? We're good.
Right.
Final
Right.
tweaks. He was, I think, taking the weekend off, and he said, oh, like one more thing, this is really depressing. Kristen, I was like, yeah, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, like you cannot leave your readers in this place.
Yeah.
You just can't do this to your readers.
That's a good editor.
Right. I never really, did not. That wasn't in, again, I was trying to tell the truth. And that's all.
Sure.
And so I really thought about it, and I thought, no, you're right. It is really depressing, but I don't have anything else to say. This is it. This is where I end up too. And I agree. It's not great.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not very hopeful. And he said, okay, I respect that. And then a couple of days later, another email like, Kristen, just give us something, anything. And so that's when I took another look. Okay, right now I really have to do this. So that's when I gave him the last sentence of the book. What was once done might also be undone. And honestly, I felt so foolish. I felt like so sheepish. Like, this is not enough. And he's like, I'll take it. But here's the truth, right? I didn't think a book could change something at all.
Yeah.
But I've seen that it can.
Yeah.
It can. Yeah.
I've seen that knowing this history, and it really is the power of history, right? Because again, you can have theological debates, and those have been going on for centuries. And everybody is kind of, they have their view, they know the counter arguments, and they're not going to budge. Or at least oftentimes today, it seems. But history just shows how those deeply held beliefs came to be.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And once you see that, then you can ask, oh, wait a minute, right? Things didn't used to look this way.
Yeah.
Not all conservative Protestants were Christian nationalists.
Yeah.
Evangelicals used to have very different ideas of what it meant to be a Christian man, championing self-restraint, not aggression. Like, as soon as you have those pieces in place, you can say, well, then how did things get to where they are now?
Sure.
And is this where we want things to be?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so once you see how things were made, you can decide if you want to unmake them. And it's not going to be easy at all, but it is possible. And I've seen that happen, certainly on an individual level. I've heard from right now, literally hundreds and hundreds of readers, probably well over 1,000 by now. Every day I get messages, just heartfelt testimonies saying, this is the story of my life.
Yeah.
And now I can see, and here's what I'm going to, and I was complicit, and here's how, and here's what I'm going to do differently. And it's really amazing.
What has been done can be undone.
That is
so good. I love that it was not enough when you wrote it. You were like, oh my gosh, no, this is, and yet it is the truth.
It is true.
And it's an awakening.
Well, one thing, Kristen, the terminology she uses is a Bible believing evangelical culture. Isn't it interesting that we can be Bible believing and yet not be Jesus following?
Yes, exactly.
And that's, I think, the divide that you bring crystal clear in this book. Sorry, Jason, I totally cut you off.
If you want to shine a light on the darkness, you have to have a light.
Yeah.
And boy, when you can find one that is Jesus on a cross, sacrificial love, reconciling the world, not
co-suffering.
Co-suffering.
Yes.
This restorative perspective of who he is, you've got something now that can really help.
Yes.
The book that I wrote was a theological book. It was about the nature of God and his sovereignty, but it was addressing the same things that you were addressing. Just as we could talk about the culture within American politics, you can talk about the culture within churches.
Yes.
And you can talk about the abuses that take place within churches.
Yes.
When I think about the church, when I think about America, we think about power as the ability to control.
Yes.
So the thing I was pushing at was that we've painted God as a God that is in control, instead of a God that is sacrificial love.
Right.
Absolutely.
And when you have a God that is sacrificial love, he redefines what power is.
Mm-hmm. Somehow
Jesus believed that going to a cross was the most powerful thing that a leader could do.
Yes.
He thought that was the answer. There's something you said that I thought was good. You talked about the connection between power and privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And I would look at Jesus and say Jesus was incredibly privileged, but not the way that we have defined it. Yeah. His privilege had something that was uniquely connected to his relationship with his Father.
Yeah.
And but I would love to have you speak to power and privilege.
Yeah, So I'm not a theologian. I'm just a Plato historian. But I, as a Christian, this really does seem the crux of things. So what does power look like in terms of the Christian faith? And one thing that's super clear in the New Testament is that Jesus always messes with everybody's expectations, right?
Yeah.
He never
Yeah.
fulfills the expectations, always undermines, like, no, that's not what we're going for here. Sit at my right hand,
Right.
the triumphal entry, that like over and over again. It's just the last shall be first, and just completely messes with human understandings of power.
Yeah.
And it is so tempting, right? Power is a temptation, and Christians in particular are so adept at justifying their own power, their own grasp for power, because we're always going to do amazing righteous things with it.
Sure.
But that in and of itself undermines what I think is so revolutionary about Christianity, so revolutionary about Christ, about the gospel message, that Jesus divested himself of power, right? Exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And yet, when we look at certainly American evangelicalism over the last half century and more, there is a very different understanding of power at its heart. It is the more power, the better.
Right.
The more worldly power, the more political power, the more military power, so that we can protect our truth, God's truth, our truth. It's the same, right? But it's not that God's truth defines ours. Ours, we say, and God is on our side.
Sure.
And so you can just see how this ends up distorting, corrupting the faith itself, because you can see how, Jesus, the Jesus of the Gospels, gets redefined into a warrior Christ who, has tattoos down his leg and is riding a horse and charging into battle, wielding a bloody sword to slay all his enemies.
Right.
And of course, his enemies are your enemies, and you have a lot of enemies. And this really ultimately does offer a corrupted version of Christianity. What else? The other thing I noticed when I looked at this research was just how important the concept of authority was.
Right.
Authority popped up over and over again, on advice to Christian parents, how to be a Christian wife, how to be a Christian leader, all of this.
And a twisted perspective on it.
Yes. So, who has authority? And it's always this hierarchical chain of command.
Yeah.
And deference to authority was inculcated, coerced, taught, right?
Yeah.
In all sorts of literature. And I see the effects of that. I see the fruit of it you talk about church cultures and the pressure to show deference to the authorities over you. Yeah. So if you're a woman, to your husband, if you're a church member, to your pastor, if you're a less important pastor, then to the more important pastor, and all the way up. Yeah. And that deference to authority means not speaking truth, keeping your mouth shut, not exposing wrongs. And that, the whole last chapter of this book is about abusive cultures in evangelical organizations. And the acts of perpetrators are horrific, but just as horrific are the acts of the community to cover up, to condone, to blame the victims, and always deference to authority and, to quote unquote, protect the mission of the church, the organization.
Yeah.
And cumulatively, well, individually and cumulatively, you see just how much harm that impulse has done.
It's devastating.
So it is a misplaced authority.
I love that God identifies himself as love personified.
Yes.
And therefore, if we're going to look at that as ultimate authority and ultimate power, love never seeks to control.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so love is not controlling.
Right.
No.
And so if we're going to truly embrace the God that Jesus revealed, and Jason and I are both like, this is our number one pursuit is, God is perfectly revealed in Jesus. Jesus is the mirror image of the Father. If you've seen him, you've seen the Father. He came to truly show us what it was like to be human and to understand who the Father was. And the Father was love and is love. And so a authoritative or power structure void of love is always going to be perverted into control, manipulation, fear.
Yes.
We've seen it time and time and time again of what this is what we're capable of. And the danger is we assign it to God's character, something that he literally has nothing to do with.
Counter to who he is.
Yes.
And Jesus was great at not only exposing that, but then using that love authority to go to the cross and show us what it's like to live sacrificially.
Yeah.
I use the example of Peter, and I imagine that this is exactly what you're talking about. Peter had a perspective of what it on earth as it is in heaven would look like.
Yes.
And he got part of it right. He thought part of it was, I have to be willing to lay my life down. Mm-hmm. But then he also thought, I have to be willing to die for Jesus, and I also have to be willing to kill for Jesus. And so he goes into a garden and swings a sword on behalf of his devotion to his ideology.
Yes. Right.
And Jesus rebukes him.
Exactly.
He says, put the sword away. You know not, and essentially the same thing he said to the disciples who wanted to call fire down. You know not what spirit you're of. It's counter to my nature. I'm on my way to show you what authority looks like.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm on my way to a cross to lay my life down.
And your love is revival. You're shaking the crowd. Hey guys, I'm interrupting this podcast for just a minute so I can invite you to partner with us by giving to A Family Story. A Family Story is a 501, a nonprofit, and it's our ministry. And it's what allows for me to produce this podcast and other regular content. We've been living this faith journey for a long time, but 2014 was when we officially stepped away from the traditional pastoring approach to full-time ministry. It's been fun. This journey's been wild. And this last year was no less faith-inducing, with COVID affecting travel and speaking. And it's been good, because hey, we started a podcast. Our passion is to create content catalytic for an encounter with the always good, transforming, reconciling love of our Heavenly Father. And so our heart through this ministry has always been that through speaking, writing, film, and music, we're relentlessly sharing the goodness of our Father, the good news. Your giving goes directly to support this podcast, as well as written content, discipleship content, teaching small group messages, articles that we release weekly, and also the book I'm writing. I'm excited about what I'm chasing down right now. We appreciate all the support, whether it's sharing, writing a review, following us, signing up for our email list, or financially. We just love being on the journey with you. If you want to give to A Family Story, you can go to afamilystory.org, afamilystory.org, and click on the Give button. All right, thanks, guys. Let's get back to the podcast.
Because of how I'm wired, politics, I approach politics like my 4-year-old approached peas. He hated peas. You know, I have to eat them. You know, I'm gagging. You know, the juice is slipping down my chin. You know, that's how I feel about politics, because it's just such a messy, dualistic, for or against. But I really hate when the church begins to participate with its dualistic thinking. And I would love for you to help us understand how evangelicalism has stepped so far away from this that is the gospel truth, that is Jesus, that is sacrificial love. I mean, you can read the quote. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and read it real quick. I've got it right here, and it's in your conclusion at the end. Kristen, you said, despite evangelicals' frequent claims that the Bible is the source of their social and political commitments, evangelicalism must be seen as a cultural and political movement rather than a community defined chiefly by its theology. One more sentence. Evangelical views on any given issue are facets of this larger cultural identity, and no number of Bible verses will dislodge the greater truths at the heart of this. It's almost like, and I would take that a step further and say the character and nature of Jesus, because one thing that Jason and I are chasing after is we read our Bibles differently because of the filter of Jesus that we're reading it through.
Yes.
Now we're letting him be our rabbi, our teacher in the process of even reading scripture. So we're not trying to assign a political context to it. And then I think what you're saying in that quote, I'll let you speak for yourself. What I got from it was we started out aligning ourselves with these scriptures, but then we thought that the better power way would be through politics and culture. And so we ditched that, where we use that as a segue, because you can make scripture say pretty much anything you want.
Right.
There's a lot to work with there.
We ditched that.
Yeah.
And we went with this as our means of achieving authority and power.
Yeah. That that no number of Bible verses sentence was really inspired by conversations I had with a lot of evangelical activists who are working with refugees and on immigration reform, and just so much frustration, because there is no shortage of Bible passages telling followers of Christ to welcome the stranger at all. Like that's a pretty clear theme throughout all of Scripture, and yet that just doesn't get them anywhere. And so, politics. How does politics work? And this gets back to that question of power, really. Of when evangelicals decided to advance their purportedly religious aims, that they needed to do so through politics. And yes, politics is often a zero-sum game. It's this us versus them. Kind of the rules and compromise. Lately, it's not really you aren't finding a middle ground, but it does. It's kind of a battle. And now I'm reformed enough to say that that Christians should be involved in politics if we live in kind of a democratic country, and that there are ways to do that. But Christians ought to be troublemakers within their parties, right?
Love that.
That's really the reputation that we should have.
That's good.
We should be the voices of conscience all the time. We should be the ones who are not dependable party line voters. We should be the ones that say, great on this line, great. You know what? No, this is not okay. And we're going to push you on this. And so Christians should be uniting across party differences and should be talking across differences on the issues, right? Because we know that Christians are going to have different views on what the best policy is in any given situation. That's the world is messy. Fixing this messy world is messy. And so that's all okay, right? This should not, again, be a zero-sum game, but Christians absolutely should be the strange ones in every political party that they find themselves, the ones who are working across the aisle, the ones who refuse to demonize their opponents, the ones who don't show deference to their party officials, right? To the people up their party chain of command, a disruptive force. And that is exactly what most Christians are not right now in this country.
And I think, Kristen, what that speaks to, and what I take away from that, is really our allegiance is to another kingdom. Our allegiance is to, first and foremost, this kingdom that sits up here. It sits above politics. It sits above right and left. And that's something I've been really preaching since the 2016 election, and before that, was please get off the right-left spectrum and don't align yourselves exclusively with that, because the only room there is to move at each other, as opposed to get up on this spectrum of the kingdom where love is the law, and where you can drop down anywhere on that line of political spectrum and love people. And I think that really is what I'm finding more and more, is that and hopefully, I believe your book will push people toward this conclusion. I mean, it helps me. It helps reinforce my biases that we should let love be the preeminent thing amongst us. But love will speak the truth. Love will engage people in a way that is in their best interest. And I love what you're saying about Christians should be the disruptive ones in any engagement. I think it's Gabe Lyons who says we should both be repulsive and engaging at the same time, that we would repulse the culture because of the stand of not just morality, but with true character that we're wanting to represent. But then love should also engage people and allow them to be drawn into it. I mean, that's a both and kind of situation that we're walking on.
A lot of the folks that are traveling with us on this podcast would use the terminology of, and we use it occasionally too, deconstructing, and then reconstructing. I'm more fascinated. I like deconstructing, but I'm way more excited about the reconstructing aspects of our faith. But I think a whole lot of the movement that is taking place right now, this deconstructing movement that is taking place within the church. And I'll say this on the side, I didn't grow up evangelical. But I know that because of how much it's baked into our culture, just like you, it's in our songs, it's in a whole lot of the content of what we read. And so it's certainly played roles in my life, and I've had to continue to find places of, continue to repent, continue to discover empathy and compassion, and I think that's really important that you're doing that in community. But I think that the great deconstructing thing that's happening right now is a response to a lot of what you're writing about, a lot of the dissatisfaction with a control-based power structure that is blind to privilege, blind to
it's a hierarchy.
It's a hierarchical. It's very hierarchical, blind to economic disparities, blind to the ideology that is nationalism. And I would love for you to talk about. I've heard you speak a little bit about deconstructing and the cultural baggage that has affected our faith.
So this deconstruction, I mean, it is happening across evangelicalism, and I was just talking with a journalist about this this past week, actually, and so she is kind of self-identified coastal elite. They don't do religion much out there, and in her. At least on her beat. And so she said, I have this theory that, we hear a lot about deconstruction right now, what's happening in white evangelicalism, and people out by me are saying, they're all walking away from the faith, kind of like good riddance to religion. She's like, that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people holding more firmly to their faith, rediscovering, refreshing their faith. So I was like, yes, so let's keep talking, right? That's exactly what I see, which isn't to say that all are, right? Some say they've been through so much, they've seen so much, they've experienced so much, like they need to walk away. And there are some, so I don't want to speak for all, ex-evangelicals, some are very clearly walking away from the Christian faith in its entirety.
Sure.
But many are deconstructing these cultural layers that have for so long been packaged and sold as Christianity.
Yeah.
Right.
As Orthodox Christianity, take it or leave it kind of thing. And it never fit right with them, right? These ideals of masculinity or femininity or this vision of power, or, it could be papered over maybe for a time. If you were in a position of privilege, right? You could paper over some of the harsher effects of this ideology, maybe with lots of really lovely language. But at a certain point, and often for many, it was somewhere along the line, the last 4.5 years, that kind of got kind of ripped away, and now we have to see, wait, what is really happening here? Where is God's love in this set of allegiances, in this public behavior, and in this interpersonal relationship too? There's been a lot of fracturing within evangelical communities, within families. And so I think that's the deconstruction that's taking place. It's not, for many evangelicals, in any way abandoning their faith. It's actually a very exciting time where they are reclaiming their faith. They are digging back into the scriptures. They are able to see now for the first time just how much of this was cultural packaging.
Right.
And much of that cultural packaging actually subverts the core gospel message. And so we need to get rid of that to rediscover what's really at the heart of the gospel. And honestly, that's a really exciting time. So, a lot of people are looking from the outside saying, this is a dumpster fire in white evangelicalism. I mean, spiritually, you could also say it's a very healthy conflagration because, this needed to happen. This absolutely needed to happen in order for a more authentic and more faithful Christianity to emerge.
There's the hope right there.
Yeah.
She just nailed the entire hope of this book.
What once was done can be undone.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is so good.
And I agree with you. I see that happening.
I do too.
I really do. That's what we're so excited about. You could look at it and go, oh, this is unnerving. This is scary. And my core foundational belief about the nature of God is that he is love, and love never leaves us, never forsakes us, neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons. Nothing separates us from the love of God. So even those that are stepping away from their faith, if you will say that, they're really stepping away from their fractured understandings and broken experiences. And I'm convinced that it's a good thing. Because there's freedom on the other side of this, and I'm actually quite hopeful for what the church looks like in the coming days, and then the impact that might have on a nation.
Yeah.
Anyway, call me an optimist.
You are totally an optimist, Stacey. So am I. That's why we do this podcast together.
That's right.
Kristen, we really, really appreciate you taking the time, and we're gonna dive into some. Unless there's something else that you just wanted to throw in there that we've missed, or something that you want to just
what's
add.
burning on your heart?
What's a passion in your
I'll
heart
just do a quick follow up to that. We ended on such a nice note of hope, and here I'm going to bring it out again because I'm a historian. It's what we do, and I don't have my editor here to tell you to just stop. But I absolutely, I'm so inspired. It does give me so much hope what I see happening on an individual level across American evangelicalism right now. Where I am much less optimistic is what I see happening and not happening on an institutional level.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. It's one thing to have this kind of personal reckoning and to acknowledge your complicity and to deconstruct and to, reach for a different understanding of the faith. It's a very different thing for an institution or an organization to acknowledge its complicity, to give up the power it has accrued, to risk alienating powerful donors and constituents. And so I am seeing right now so many individuals acting out of their convictions in evangelical spaces. And I'm seeing lots of really difficult situations where pastors are being fired, where school teachers are being fired, where people are being edged out. And by and large, the institutions remain unchanged or even reinforced in the status quo. So somebody like Beth Moore is a prominent national example where she worked to change within the SBC for years and finally said, enough, right? I'm walking away. This is not my home anymore. So the SBC stays as it is. Russell Moore yesterday announced that he's leaving his leadership role there and joining Christianity Today. And so there too, you see the voices of dissent eventually leaving. And social scientists can demonstrate that actually leaves the institutions more radicalized. And so that is also a dynamic that we see. So I'm very hopeful on an individual basis. I'm hopeful for the church because this is a healthy process. In terms of hopeful about, American evangelicalism writ large, when we think of institutions and organizations, or when we think about the fate of this country, then I'm a little bit more chastened. So I will say that, but God can do amazing things. So, and
I understand. It's a dumpster fire. You just used that reference. I can look at what's going on in our nation, and we're more divided in many ways than in my lifetime. And I don't know where this nation goes. But as Derek said, I'm a part of a different family. I'm a part of something that I'm convinced is ultimately sacrificial in nature. And I guess what I'll say is I have all my eggs in this basket that Jesus was convinced that laying his life down would change the world. And that 12 fellas, and actually it wasn't 12 guys. We spent a lot of time on them, but it was women and men, but a very small group.
Come on now. Jesus first commissioned, ordained, sent a woman to be the first to preach the resurrection.
And he was convinced that this small group, this love that he had displayed on the cross was more powerful than the broken institutions of the day or the future. I guess that's the place where, in the midst of all of this mess, that's the place where I find my hope. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would say to that for white evangelicals or ex-evangelicals who find that their faith is in a crisis place right now, right? That they have to reckon with what was that I believed, that I participated in, that I was complicit in for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And it can be really unsettling. To them, I would say, remember that the fate of Christianity does not rest on white evangelicalism. It never has.
That's good.
That's a myth that white evangelicals have been telling themselves for a long time.
That's right.
That Christianity has been flourishing outside of white American evangelical spaces this whole time.
Yeah, that's good.
And you can just go there, right? You don't necessarily have to fix white evangelicalism. I mean, if you want to learn resilience, if you want to learn faithfulness in the face of pretty much, constant loss, defeat, look at the Black prophetic tradition of American Christianity. Yeah. Incredible resources, incredible witness, and an incredible community, beloved community, and incredible people. And so, this is not all on you.
Yeah.
You don't have to fix things, and maybe it's not yours to fix, but you don't have to worry about Christianity. You don't have to worry about God. My favorite quote in the book is actually towards the end. It's Rachel Den Hollander's, where she's talking about the tendencies of evangelicals to cover up abuse, to cover up the darker side of what's going on in order to protect the witness of the church.
Yeah.
And she has this amazing quote where she says, Jesus Christ does not need your protection. Jesus only asks for your obedience.
Yeah.
And what that looks like is telling the truth and pursuing justice. That's it.
That's good.
Right. And I love that.
Yeah.
So that's really the moral center of this book.
I would say
that comes across crystal clear.
Yeah. And I would even go further. The church isn't determined on whether or not America is America as we know it. That Jesus didn't need America for the gospel to be established in the hearts of and minds.
Nor
of,
is he in the throne
God.
room, like twiddling his thumbs, pacing around, worried.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think he's pretty confident that
That's
said, I'll build my church that the gates of hell will not prevail against. We want to ask you about tacos because that's part of this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
But before we do, I'm just going to give a little teaser to our audience. Chapter 14 of your book is titled Spiritual Badasses. And I'm just going to leave that right there because that chapter alone is worth the price of this book. So thank you for writing chapter 14, Spiritual Badasses.
You are welcome.
We'll leave it right there. Jason, you want to ask about tacos?
This is Rethinking God with Tacos. We tried eating tacos when we first did it, but I was tired of editing out all the smacking. So now we just talk about them.
Not a good sound.
You got kids, so you've got to do tacos.
We do tacos at least once a week. In fact, I just took meat out of the freezer, so that's on the menu tonight. Yeah. My 7-year-old's favorite meal.
There you go.
So yes, we do tacos very regularly here.
Okay, so we need a little more in depth. Now, you are a historian. You know how to detail these things. Give us your perfect taco.
Oh, see, this is where. So the tacos that my 7-year-old insists on are very Midwestern American versions of tacos. So we're talking flour tortilla, ground beef with seasoning, and she needs sour cream and lettuce and no cheese is her version. And she gets very disappointed when I introduce any variations. That's not her taco meal. And she's very picky. So that we have that taco meal at least once a week.
Well, her palate just has not been developed yet, so we'll give her a break.
I have failed as a parent.
No,
yes.
I feel like you're going to segue into something that is a little more eccentric.
Well, I do like the more traditional. So chicken, a little cilantro, not too much cilantro, a squeeze of lime, corn tortilla, that and onions, lots of onions like that.
Authentic.
That's there's more street tacos, so a little more authentic. Yeah, so that would be my preference. Sometimes I do serve those, but it's always to great complaint.
Sure.
So that we do both here.
My 14-year-old daughter's the same. It's meat and cheese.
The cross every mother bears is the 7-year-old child and their palate.
We
cater
to the lowest denominator.
That's right.
It is what it is.
Which is basically what evangelicalism has been doing for all these years. Let's just end it on that right there. Jason, you nailed it, bro.
Comes full circle.
It's been really good having you.
Thank you so much.
Where can we find you?
Yeah, so I have a website, KristenDuMez.com. That's KristinDumez, like Du Mez. I put a lot of writings up there, but mostly I'm on Facebook, handle at KKDuMez. It's Kristen Kobus Du Mez. I have an author page there, but pretty much every 10 minutes I'm on Twitter.
Come on.
That's where I really am. That's at KKDuMez, and I spend way too much time on Twitter. In fact, I'm going to have to go check it when we're done because I'm in a little conversation with Denny Burke right now. So,
I'm going to go track that down.
It's a good one.
I may inject myself into it.
Oh, I think you need to.
Well, thank you for
thank you
being
so
with us.
much. This has really, really been good. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a blast. Thank you.
Hey guys, we're so glad that you are joining us for season 2 of Rethinking God with Tacos. You can find me, Derek Turner, at rivercharlotte.com. That's my church. And I'm on all the social medias as Pastor Derek T, Derek, Pastor Derek T.
Yeah, and he's a Twitter savant. You got to follow him on Twitter. I'm also on Twitter at Jason Clark Is. And you can find all of these podcasts, including season 1, on all of the platforms. You can also go to afamilystory.org, and everything's there. If you sign up for our mailing list, we send out a weekly email that has articles, podcast information, and we also let you know about new books coming out or events that we're connected to. So like, share, retweet, and man, if you could write a review, it actually does something for the rankings. It makes it more available. So,
but a 5-star review, of course.
Yes.
If you can't write a 5-star review or something, just don't even write a review.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you can't say something nice,
don't say anything at all. I like that, and then apply that to this podcast. Definitely.
That's my motto. That's what I do.
I love it. So love you guys. Appreciate you coming on the ride with us. God bless.